Coming to paperback and e-readers from SJS Direct, Isis, House of Isis, the goddess next door takes on a hustling Hotep high priestess in Harlem in this Afrocentric Isis series adventure. Pre-order Isis, House of Isis on Amazon.com today. Recently, Warner Bros. Announced that acclaimed director Ava DuVernay would be directing an adaptation of DC Comics' New Gods. And while I've been happy for Ava DuVernay's success in the film industry in the past, I'm deeply disappointed with this announcement that she would be directing an adaptation of DC Comics' New Gods, because Ava DuVernay, as related to this project, is grossly unqualified to take on the new gods and bring them to life on the silver screen. When I look at her track record on films like dramas like Soma and I Will Follow, yes, she's a strong director on dramas. However, when I take a look at her limited experience on films like A Wrinkle in Time, they show me that she just does not have the skill set that a director would need to take on a project of the scale and caliber and scope of DC's New Gods. Now, when it comes down to Jack Kirby's Fourth World, where the New Gods live, it is a epic place. It is a large world that is inside of the DC universe, and it is filled with larger than life characters, big, bold worlds in two planets, Apocalypse and New Genesis, and it's a place that really you have to know what you're doing if you're a filmmaker to adapt to the screen. It's not something that a filmmaker with one film under their belt can tackle, or someone who doesn't understand how the fantasy genre works can tackle. Now, I look at Ava DuVernay's work in the trailer for A Wrinkle in Time, and she clearly shows me she just doesn't have the visual skills to bring the world of the New Gods to life. Because again, here we have two larger than life worlds. We have Apocalypse, which is supposed to be dark and very gritty and very grim and somber. Then we have New Genesis, which is supposed to be very bright and vibrant, but inside of both worlds we have larger than life characters. And this is something that Ava DuVernay, I believe, just doesn't have an understanding of how to put together, and she'd be completely out of her depth trying to create these two worlds and then bring them to life on screen. Because again, you're not just bringing one world to life, you're bringing two worlds to life, and then you're possibly bringing modern day Earth into the mix. And that again takes a really seasoned director to know what they're doing, because in order to really bring the New Gods to life, you're going to need a director who understands how to not only make computer generated images work, but they're going to have to know how to make miniature models work, and they're going to have to know how to make stuntmen work, because you're going to need all three of those elements to come to life in order to bring these new gods to work. Because when you have a world this big, it takes a really, really grand vision, and it takes a person who can really plan long term at developing that grand vision for that kind of world. The kind of directors I would believe would be qualified to make this film would be someone like Peter Jackson, who has shown us that he has mastered this through the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Someone like Steven Spielberg, who has shown me decades of experience of creating new and fantastic worlds in films like E.T. and creating alien creatures and Close Encounters. Someone like George Lucas, who has shown that he has mastered this with the films of the Star Wars trilogy, even though episodes 1 through 3 weren't that great. But he has shown me through the original trilogy he has that ability to create that grand vision. Or someone like James Cameron, who has shown me through films like Aliens, The Abyss, T2, and Avatar that he is a grand master of creating these fantastic worlds with these fantastic characters and making sure that they're so rich and multidimensional that we see their humanity within them. When I look at those directors' backgrounds, they have shown me that they have the skills with miniatures, the skills with CGI, the skills with stuntmen, in order to combine these elements in order to make that grand and fantastic world. But when I look at Ava DuVernay, she only has one film under her belt, and that film was critically panned by critics, and it failed to catch an audience at the box office. She just does not have the background or the experience to tackle a project of the scale of New Gods with just one film. When I look at the other great filmmakers in the fantasy and sci-fi genre, they weren't tackling those projects in the beginnings of their career. No, George Lucas started with THX 1138, a film that was critically panned before the Star Wars trilogy, but you could see the vision that this man had in his visuals. Steven Spielberg started out with Duel, and then he went on to Close Encounters of the Third Kind before he started tackling more serious material like E.T. and the Indiana Jones series. And when you take a look at James Cameron, he started with the first Terminator, a low budget movie, and then moved on to Aliens, The Abyss, and then he was given his masterpiece, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and after that, he did other films like Avatar, where he really showed how incredible his vision was, along with doing an adaptation of Titanic, which had incredible visuals of this ship being destroyed on its maiden voyage. So these men built themselves up over time before they took on heavier projects with larger scales. They started out on small scale projects before they took on larger scale projects. But with Ava DuVernay, they are thrusting her forward towards these larger scale projects, and that's setting Ava DuVernay up for failure. And the reason why it's setting her up for failure is because people are expecting her to do a lot more than she's ready for. Because when you're doing science fiction and fantasy films, it takes time for you to learn how to develop skills to make these films work, and it takes time for you to, skills that will help you learn how to use the tools of the medium like CGI, miniatures, and stuntmen to make those worlds come alive. Ava DuVernay just has not learned enough yet before she takes on this type of project. A Wrinkle in Time clearly showed me that she just isn't ready for this yet, and she needs to cut her teeth on a couple of smaller, lower budgeted projects before she tackles something on the level of the New Gods. Now, Warner Brothers executives probably think that because Patty Jenkins made Wonder Woman, they can get the same type of success from New Gods. And they're probably thinking, oh, here's a woman director, Patty Jenkins, who made a great Wonder Woman, so Ava DuVernay, a more acclaimed woman, will make an even better New Gods. Now, that's really flawed logic, because Patty Jenkins was someone who really got lucky because she got an opportunity to make sure that this film was visually stronger, because it was her direction that made the film strong in spite of a weak script. But to put that same expectation on Ava DuVernay is just ridiculous, because she cannot do anything to improve a really weak script. I mean, because Patty Jenkins just used her imagination and creativity to make the film a little better. She elevated weak material. But to put that same expectation on Ava DuVernay is ridiculous. Instead, they should be looking at trying to make the best New Gods film possible, not half putting together a New Gods film in the same way that Warner Brothers put together that Catwoman in 2004. Because when I take a look at what's being done to Ava DuVernay, it's the exact same thing that was done to Pitoff when they made Catwoman in 2004. Now, Pitoff was a guy who had starting out his career, and he had a critically acclaimed film called The Doke, which had very dark visuals, and many people were talking about how he should be able to direct the next Batman movie. However, Warner Brothers set Pitoff up for failure by having him direct a Catwoman movie that starred Halle Berry and had one of the worst scripts in the history of superhero films, a script that did not feature Selina Kyle, the cat burglar that was featured in many of the Batman comics. No, it featured Patience Phillips, some meek, mousy woman who turned into a cat woman who, after she supposedly died, and came back to life. And once buzz came out about this movie, many comic fans literally torpedoed this movie, and it died at the box office, and it killed Pitoff's career before it could even get started. And when I take a look at Ava DuVernay's career, this film and the other film, A Wrinkle in Time, look like the attempts by many to kill her career before it really starts to amp up and move to that next level phase. And when I look at Ava DuVernay, she looks like she's playing checkers in Hollywood instead of playing chess, because I see several chess moves being made to checkmate her and checkmate the entire black fantasy genre, so that there won't be any more black fantasy films to ever come out of a movie studio. And they're using Ava DuVernay as a pawn to do this. And the first thing that they did was through that A Wrinkle in Time movie. Now, A Wrinkle in Time was an adaptation of a novel. However, they got Ava DuVernay to direct it because they expected it to fail. So they started to use A Wrinkle in Time's failure to say a black director couldn't direct a black fantasy film, and it was her direction that led to this film having a bad box office. Now, with Warner Brothers, what they want to do is put the nail in that coffin by saying we gave this black female director a fantasy film featuring a grand cast of characters, and she was just not up for the job. So that proves that black people have no imagination, black people have no vision, and because she failed at New Gods, no black people should have another opportunity at making a fantasy or a science fiction film. What they want to do is slam the lid shut on fantasy and science fiction films featuring African Americans, and they want to slam the lid shut on opportunities for African American filmmakers who want to make fantasy and science fiction films behind the camera. And they want to do this because they don't want to see African Americans presenting images of themselves in fantastic worlds or having fantastic adventures, when it is possible for us to have those fantastic adventures on screen with a qualified director, a qualified screenwriter, and a qualified visual effects specialist who understands how to use tools like miniature models, tools like computer generated images, and tools like stuntmen to make a fantastic world come to life or make action and adventure come to life. Someone who has seasoning and experience can really make an African American fantasy film come to life. But because Ava DuVernay is way out of her depth and just does not have the seasoning yet, what's going to happen to her is these white executives behind the background, they're going to use her as a tool to make sure that no other films get made. Because when it comes down to Hollywood executives, they're looking at the big picture, whereas most people are emotional and looking at the small picture and thinking, oh, this New Gods film is going to come out. But anyone who knows that when you hire a grossly unqualified director, they're just not going to be able to make the strong visuals or present the story on screen in a way that really brings it to life. And with Warner Brothers' really poor track record of films, this one could be a bigger disaster than Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Justice League combined. Because when you combine a inexperienced director with a studio that really has no understanding of how to adapt its own material, you're going to get a failure so epic it could transcend multiple universes. If you'd like to try some of my SJS Direct publications like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, The Temptation of John Haynes, or the Spinsterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. And if you want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.